In case you're new to this topic, Jesus' death by crucifixion is considered a fact of history by historical Jesus scholars and New Testament scholars, regardless of their theological background. The scholarly consensus on Jesus' death arises from, one, having a variety of ancient sources reporting that Jesus was crucified, and two, knowing how crucifixion works. We have Christian, Jewish, and Roman sources reporting Jesus' execution, and our understanding of Roman crucifixion practices pretty well rules out any speculations about Jesus surviving his execution. It's a fact of history, as even non-Christian scholars are happy to admit. A couple of examples. Atheist New Testament scholar Gerd Ludemann declares that Jesus' death as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable. John Dominic Crossan of the infamous Jesus Seminar says that there is not the slightest doubt about the fact of Jesus' crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Marcus Borg, another member of the Jesus Seminar, states that Jesus' execution is the most certain fact about the historical Jesus. Jewish scholar Pinchas Lapid concludes that Jesus' death by crucifixion is, quote, historically certain. According to Paula Fredrickson, a convert to Judaism, the single most solid fact about Jesus' life is his death. He was executed by the Roman prefect Pilate on or around Passover in the manner Rome reserved particularly for political insurrectionists, namely crucifixion. And Bart Ehrman maintains one of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate. Notice that these non-Christian scholars and writers aren't simply saying that we have some evidence that Jesus died by crucifixion. They're saying it's indisputable, that it's historically certain, that it's one of the most certain facts of history. So I'll call the view that Jesus actually died by crucifixion realism. What people saw happen and what scholars are convinced happened really happened. It wasn't a trick or an illusion. There have always been some Muslim realists with regard to the crucifixion, Muslims who believe that Jesus did die by crucifixion, but realism has always been a minority position in Islam. There are two non-realist theories that are far more popular among Muslims. There's the substitution theory that Allah replaced Jesus with another person, and what I'll call theistic swoon theory, the theory that Allah miraculously kept Jesus alive throughout the agony of the crucifixion process. So what's wrong with substitution theory? A bunch of things. First, the Quran says nothing about Allah taking another person and disguising him to make him look like Jesus. This, as Khalil pointed out, comes from later commentaries. None of these commentaries goes back to Muhammad, and they contradict each other on almost every detail. Second, there's only one verse in the Quran that can even be interpreted as promoting substitution myth, and the verse is open to a number of alternative explanations by simply comparing it with other Quran verses, as Khalil showed. Third, we know where substitution theory originated. It originated among the Gnostics and Docetists, two groups that had nothing whatsoever in common with Islam. These groups are further removed from Islam than Christianity is. So if the author of the Quran was taking this theory from the Docetists, that is a major problem for the Quran. Fourth, substitution theory portrays Allah as a malicious deceiver. If Jesus didn't actually die, but Allah made people think that Jesus died, the real reason billions of people are now convinced that Jesus died is that Allah did an outstanding job tricking everyone. The reason that Khalil now believes there was a crucifixion and that I believe there was a crucifixion and Cameron believes that there's a crucifixion is because Allah just did such a great job tricking everyone that we're still tricked by this. We know that Jesus' followers became convinced that he died as well. We know that Jesus' followers went out preaching his death by crucifixion. According to the substitution myth, where did they get that idea? They got it from Allah, because Allah is the one who tricked people into believing that. But according to the Quran, Jesus' followers were devout Muslims. So if these devout Muslim followers of Jesus were deceived, we can conclude that Allah deceives even the people who follow his prophets. Fifth, the Islamic view portrays Jesus as a failure. The Jesus of the Quran spent years preaching Islam only to have his life's work sabotaged by Allah, who convinced the world that Jesus died by crucifixion, ultimately giving rise to Christianity. The Islamic Jesus didn't win a single lasting convert, and he accomplished absolutely nothing of any lasting significance if we stick to substitution theory.
In the Bible, God deceives people. I think in 2 Thessalonians, verse 10, or around there, it says that near at the end times, God will send a delusion on the people of the earth, and the unrighteous people will be deluded. And then also in Revelation, when you have like different beasts who are doing miracles and false prophets, and they're able to do these things, and this is also a form of deception. So I wouldn't use that argument. It makes God into a deceiver, because if you're coming at it from a Christian perspective, someone can just argue back and say, well, certain biblical ideas imply that God does deceive people.
If you look at passages in the Bible, like 2 Thessalonians, it's similar to what you have in the Old Testament with where Moses is interacting with Pharaoh, and it says Pharaoh hardened his heart, Pharaoh hardened his heart, Pharaoh hardened his heart, Pharaoh hardened his heart. And then all of a sudden it starts saying God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And it's like, if you really want to go down this route, I'm locking you into it. And that's the impression I get from 2 Thessalonians. It talks about Satan deceiving all these people and then saying God sends them a strong delusion, but it's Satan doing this deceiving that they're going along with. Whereas, and notice, to keep in mind, I don't actually have a problem with God tricking someone if there's some sort of good point to it. Like if I was walking down the street and a bunch of guys are going to kill me, and God tricks them into thinking I went one way when I went some other way, I think, okay, I'm fine with that. But when it's specifically in a situation like this where the people who are getting tricked, one, it's everybody. It's not just bad people who are trying to do something awful. It's not bad people who are trying to kill a prophet or something like that. It's everyone. It's even the followers of the prophet. The implications of that goes even more than what Al-Razi was saying. He's just pointing out, look, if I can't trust my senses, how do I even know I'm talking to you? If God will trick and deceive even people who follow his prophets. So these are people who, according to the Quran, at the preaching of Jesus, they said, yes, we're Muslims. We follow you. If God will lead even them astray, it's like, my goodness, now I don't know what to believe, because God will even trick people who are following his prophet.
What does the Quran say about Jesus' death and crucifixion? So in the field of academic Quranic studies, when we try to answer these questions, we first do a deep analysis of the actual Quranic text. So an intra-Quranic analysis. So the verses that you're probably familiar with are here. This is in Quran Surah 4, where it says, and for their saying, we killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of God, yet they did not kill him, neither crucified him. It was only made to appear so to them. And then it goes on to say at the end that God raised him, Jesus, up to himself. That this is what most people see. And most people look at this and they say, oh, well, the Quran outright denies the death and crucifixion of Jesus. I would venture to say that this is actually not really true. Who are these people who claim to have killed Jesus, and the Quran is denying that they did not kill him or crucify him? So we just go back a little bit in the same passage, same surah, of several verses before, and we find that there's an entire discourse about the people of the book, and in this context is talking about a certain group of Jews. So this is not an actual denial that Jesus died. It's not a denial of the event of the crucifixion. It is a denial that certain Jewish enemies of Jesus, that they claimed to have killed him. In other parts of the Quran says that actually Jesus did die. There are two verses that say God caused Jesus to die. In one of the verses, which is here, God tells Jesus, I will cause you to die. And it's important to note that this verb, tawafa, in Arabic is used all over the Quran to mean God taking a soul at death. And it's repeated again for Jesus in Surah 5. So we can go further. The Quran tells us that it's God who gives life and death. The Quran also says in other places that during a certain battle, when the believers fought and killed their enemies, it was God who killed them. And when Muhammad threw stones to defend himself, it was God who threw that. So the Quran, in the verses about crucifixion, is not denying the crucifixion as a fact. I would propose that the Quran is denying the claimed agency of Jesus' Jewish enemies to have killed him. And the Quran, in other places, is clearly saying that it is God who has agency over life and death, And it is actually God who wills Jesus to die in the way that Jesus died. That is actually very clear in the Quran. And of course, from another perspective, you could say that Jesus is not really dead because the martyrs who are killed in the way of God, according to the Quran, are not really dead, and you should not say that they are dead. We can also go forward on this, okay? So again, these are the verses I've already looked at. I would propose that if we read the Quran intertextually with the Bible, we'll find more agreement than disagreement. And I think what the Quran is saying in these passages, again, the same ones we've gone over, I think this parallels what Peter reportedly says in the book of Acts. So Peter says to the Israelites, quote, Jesus, a man accredited by God, this man was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge. So notice, Peter is saying that Jesus' death at the hands of the Israelites was by God's plan. He's taking away their agency as well. But then what did Muslims over time and space say? So you find different views. So the view that you probably know, which later became the majority, is a view in Sunni tafsir, which says someone else was put on the cross instead of Jesus. And this is based on a narrative, a story, which itself doesn't really have any supporting sources. It's literally just told as a story. And this is already there in the 700s. But at the same time, we have another view from certain Shia scholars, including the Ismailis, that Jesus did die on the cross. He was crucified in terms of his body, but he was exalted to God in terms of his spirit. So these views were both there, and they were competing with each other. We also have some evidence that perhaps Al-Ghazali, who's Sunni, also affirmed the crucifixion. Now, if we go to the post-classical period, again, the main view in Sunni tafsir continues to be substitution, but there are some cracks in this. So Fakhruddin Razi, who's a very famous Sunni scholar, he, in his tafsir, was critical of the substitution story, that someone else was crucified instead. In the modern period, we have a variety of views. We still have substitution being promoted, but we also have the swoon theory by certain modernist Muslims that say Jesus survived the crucifixion. And then we have some confessional academic scholarship from Muslims, which is casting doubt on the historicity of the crucifixion. And then finally, in modern times, we have much of modern academia, so modern academic scholars, Muslim and non-Muslim, who still say that the Quran does not deny the death and crucifixion of Jesus. It only resituates it. What is the view that I follow? Well, I follow basically the modern academic view, which tends to match the pre-modern Shia Ismaili view, which affirms the crucifixion.